Look, these people are my friends and my shipmates. I intend to continue the ship's search for them until the last possible moment.
He commanded the most famous starship in television history. Every week, for 3 years, he stood on that bridge and pointed toward the stars, and millions of people believed him. Then the show ended, the sets were torn down, and William Shatner found himself living in the back of a truck.
And then at lunch hour, publicity, and then at night, something else going on, and it's a harrowing thing.
Today, we're looking at the real reason William Shatner vanished after Star Trek. The boy from Montreal. William Shatner was born on March 22, 1931, in the Notre-Dame-de-Grâce neighborhood of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. His father, Joseph Shatner, was a clothing manufacturer. His mother, Anna Garmez, had a background in elocution. His grandparents on his father's side had come from Austria-Hungary, and his paternal grandfather had anglicized the family name from Shatner when the family arrived in Canada. It was a conservative Jewish household, structured, traditional, and not particularly sympathetic toward show business. Joseph Shatner didn't object to his son dabbling in acting as a child, but he expected something more practical to follow. Young William performed on CBC radio starting at around age 10. He played Tom Sawyer at the Montreal Children's Theatre when he was 12. He was at it constantly, but he did what his father asked and enrolled at McGill University, where he earned a Bachelor of Commerce degree in 1952. By his own later admission, he was one of the worst students at McGill. He rarely went to class and poured his energy into student theatrical productions instead. His degree was in economics. His future was elsewhere. After graduation, he worked briefly as an assistant manager at the Mountain Playhouse in Montreal, then joined the Canadian National Repertory Theatre in Ottawa. From there came what he described as a series of happy accidents. He ended up at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Ontario under the legendary director Tyrone Guthrie, and it was there, at Stratford, that something shifted in how the professional world perceived him. Guthrie later called Shatner the most promising actor the festival had employed. Christopher Plummer was there too, and when Plummer was sidelined by a kidney stone during Henry V in 1956, Shatner, his understudy, stepped into the lead role on a few hours' notice. Rather than imitate Plummer, he gave his own interpretation. Plummer was impressed. The Stratford production of Tamburlaine the Great transferred to Broadway in 1956, and Shatner came with it. New York's critics took notice. He began making his way through the golden age of American television: Studio One, Playhouse 90, Goodyear Television Playhouse, all the live dramatic anthologies that defined the medium in the 1950s. He made his film debut in 1958 in The Brothers Karamazov alongside Yul Brynner. He appeared in Judgment at Nuremberg in 1961. He played the deeply unsympathetic lead in Roger Corman's early 1962 social drama The Intruder, in which he portrayed a white agitator trying to stop school integration in the American South. It was a role that demonstrated he was not afraid of material that would make an audience uncomfortable. He was on The Twilight Zone in 1963 in the episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, one of the most frequently remembered single-episode performances in the history of that show. He was on The Outer Limits in 1964. He had his first regular series role in For the People in 1965, playing an assistant district attorney in New York City. The show didn't last, but Shatner was working constantly, building a reputation as one of the hardest working character actors on the American stage and screen. By the time Star Trek came calling in 1966, he was already a very well-established professional, just not yet a star. That was about to change. Captain Kirk and the 3-Year Mission. The original Star Trek pilot had been made with Jeffrey Hunter as the captain, but NBC rejected it and asked creator Gene Roddenberry to try again. Roddenberry reconfigured the show and the character, then went looking for someone new. Shatner came in and read for the role. Roddenberry liked what he saw immediately. According to Shatner, Roddenberry rang him, described the show, and asked him to come take a look at the pilot. Shatner loved it. He signed on, and on September 8, 1966, Star Trek, the original series, premiered on NBC. The show ran for 3 seasons and produced 79 episodes. It was never a runaway rating success during its original broadcast. That's a fact often lost in the mythology that surrounds it now. NBC moved it around the schedule, often placing it in difficult time slots. By the third season, the ratings had declined enough that NBC canceled it in 1969. Shatner was 37 years old when the last episode aired on June 3, 1969. During the run of the show, Shatner had also made an unusual career detour. In 1968, he recorded an album called The Transformed Man, on which he delivered spoken word renditions of contemporary songs and literary passages. The album became something of a cultural curiosity. His delivery was earnest and theatrical, qualities that lent the recordings an unintentional comic quality that has made them both beloved and ridiculed in equal measure ever since. At the time, it barely registered in the wider culture. Shatner had recorded it during the show's run and moved on. He didn't yet know how long the transformed man would follow him. He also knew, while the show was running, that the cast dynamic was complicated. His relationship with Leonard Nimoy, the Spock to his Kirk, was close and competitive in roughly equal measure. Nimoy himself described it as a sibling rivalry. Both men competed for screen time, attention, and prominence. Shatner was the lead, but Spock became, in some ways, the more culturally iconic character. Shatner has acknowledged over the years that he could be difficult to work with during this period, that his instinct to push for more was not always well received by co-stars who felt squeezed by it. George Takei, who played Hikaru Sulu, and Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura, have both spoken in various interviews about tensions on set with Shatner. Walter Koenig, who played Ensign Pavel Chekhov, and James Doohan, who played Engineer Montgomery Scott, have expressed similar sentiments at various points. The tension between the two men, Shatner and Nemoy, was real and lasted for decades, though it would eventually resolve into something genuine and deep before Nimoy's death in 2015. When Star Trek was canceled in June 1969, Shatner had also just gone through a divorce. His first marriage to actress Gloria Rand ended that year. They had been married since 1956 and had 3 daughters together, Leslie, Elizabeth, and Melanie. The combination of the show ending and his marriage collapsing in the same period left him in a precarious position. He had 3 daughters to support and an ex-wife in Beverly Hills. He had very little money, and he had just become strongly, perhaps permanently, associated with a character on a canceled science fiction television series. The Truck and the Lean Years. The early 1970s were brutal. Shatner has spoken about this period frankly in interviews across the years. The work did not dry up entirely. He kept booking jobs, but the quality and scale of what was available dropped dramatically. The industry had him filed under a specific category now. He was Captain Kirk. That was, in the short term, a limitation rather than an asset. Star Trek had been canceled. Nobody in Hollywood was rushing to make Star Trek movies or sequels. The show was just gone, and the man who had played its lead was available. He lost his home. He ended up living in a truck bed camper in the San Fernando Valley. He has described watching the Apollo 11 moon landing on July 20th, 1969, just a month after the show's cancellation, on a tiny black and white television while lying in the back of that camper, parked in a field on Long Island where he was performing summer stock theater. He had been invited to Cape Canaveral as Captain Kirk while the show was still on the air. He had signed something that said, "See you on the moon," and now he was watching Neil Armstrong actually walk on the moon through a 4-inch screen while he lay in a pasture trying to keep himself afloat financially. He described it as watching a high point from a very low point. The work he could find in the early 1970s was not what his career before Star Trek would have suggested. He made television movies, The People in 1972, The Horror at 37,000 Feet in 1973, Pray for the Wildcats in 1974. He did commercials for Oldsmobile, Promise Margarine, and the Canadian supermarket chain Loblaws. He guest starred on whatever shows would have him: Columbo, Ironside, Kung Fu, Mission Impossible, Hawaii Five-0, Barnaby Jones. One of his brighter moments from this period was a critically praised appearance as a prosecutor in the Andersonville trial, a 1971 PBS adaptation of a play by Saul Levitt. It was a serious dramatic performance, the kind that reminded viewers he was capable of more than the bombast and adventure of Star Trek, but it didn't shift his trajectory in any lasting way. He also did B-movies when the opportunity arose. Roger Corman cast him in Big Bad Mama in 1974. He appeared in the horror film The Devil's Reign in 1975, alongside Ernest Borgnine and a very young John Travolta in an early screen appearance. In 1977 came Kingdom of the Spiders, in which he starred as a veterinarian battling a tarantula infestation in Arizona. These were not films made for posterity. Shatner took them because they were there, because they paid, and because he had alimony, child support, and his own basic costs to cover. He also made a second marriage during this period. In 1973, he married Marcy Lafferty, the daughter of television producer Perry Lafferty. The marriage would last until 1994, his longest at over 20 years, though it would eventually end in divorce. Lafferty was a stabilizing presence during the lean years, and the marriage gave some structure to a period of professional uncertainty that might otherwise have felt entirely adrift. He has said in several interviews that the thought of quitting acting never seriously occurred to him. He had wanted nothing else since the age of 6, and even at the lowest point in the truck, he was thinking about his next job rather than an exit from the profession. There is something almost stubborn about it, a refusal to register the circumstances as permanent that kept him going when a less determined person might have found another line of work. He had a brief run of relative stability in television when he starred in the spy western series Barbary Coast in 1975 and 1976. The show was produced by Cy Chermak and set in 1870s San Francisco, with Shatner playing a government undercover agent. It ran for only 14 episodes and was not renewed, but it was a starring role, and it indicated that the networks were at least willing to put him in front of a show again. The pieces were moving, slowly, back into a more favorable arrangement. And then something happened that none of the Star Trek cast had anticipated. The reruns change everything. While Shatner was doing summer stock theater and B-movies and camper living, Star Trek was airing in syndication. Local television stations had picked up the rights to rerun the original episodes, and the show was finding its audience. Not the modest, inconsistent audience it had during its network run, but something much larger and more passionate. Students in college dormitories were rearranging their schedules around it. Fan clubs were forming. Conventions were starting up. Letters were being written. The Star Trek fan base, the Trekkies, or Trekkers, depending on who you asked, was coalescing into something with genuine cultural mass. By 1972, Star Trek had become so popular in reruns that there was substantial demand for more of it. Animated television came first. Star Trek, the animated series, premiered in September 1973 on NBC, with most of the original cast returning to voice their characters. Shatner voiced Kirk in 21 of the 22 episodes. The animated series ran until 1974. It was well received at the time. It won a Daytime Emmy Award in 1975 for Outstanding Children's Entertainment Series, and it kept the franchise visible while the behind-the-scenes discussions about a possible live-action continuation continued. Throughout the mid-1970s, Paramount Pictures wrestled with what to do with Star Trek. There were plans for a new live-action television series, tentatively called Star Trek Phase 2, which would have launched on a new Paramount television network. Pre-production began in 1977. Scripts were commissioned, the sets were being built, and then, in May 1977, Star Wars was released. The entire landscape of science fiction in Hollywood shifted overnight. Suddenly, space adventure on a massive cinematic scale was the most commercially viable thing in entertainment. Paramount looked at what they had with Star Trek Phase 2 and made the obvious decision. They scrapped the television plan and converted it into a feature film. Star Trek, the motion picture, was released in December 1979. Shatner was back as Kirk. The whole original cast was back. The budget was somewhere around $35 million, making it one of the most expensive films produced to that point. The reception from critics was measured. Many found it overly slow and visually self-indulgent, dwelling on shots of the Enterprise for minutes at a time while the plot waited, but audiences went regardless. The film earned approximately $139 million worldwide against its production and marketing costs. It was enough. There would be sequels. Shatner later recalled filming the motion picture as one of the more joyful periods of his professional life after the years of uncertainty. Being reunited with the cast, Nemoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, Nichelle Nichols, George Takei, and Walter Koenig, in a production of genuine size and ambition, felt like a reward for having stayed the course. He had once been lying in a truck camper watching the moon landing on a tiny screen, wondering what his career would be. Now he was back on the bridge of the Enterprise, on a big-budget feature, with his cast around him. Life had turned, as he put it, in ways he couldn't have scripted. The Wrath of Khan and the Resurgence. If the motion picture brought Star Trek back, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan in 1982 defined what the film franchise could be at its best. Directed by Nicholas Meyer, who had never seen a single episode of the original series before he was hired, it was leaner, faster, more emotional, and more dramatic than its predecessor. It brought back Ricardo Montalban as Khan Noonien Singh from the 1967 episode Space Seed, and it gave the franchise something it had been missing on screen: genuine stakes. At the end of the film, Spock dies. Nemoy's decision to allow the character to die gave the movie an emotional weight that the motion picture had entirely lacked. Shatner's performance in Wrath of Khan is among his best work. The scene in which Kirk receives the news of Spock's death, his face cycling through disbelief, controlled grief, and something close to devastation, is still talked about. He was 51 years old when the film was released, and he was playing a man grappling with aging, with loss, and with the end of things he had taken for granted. The film's themes fit the stage of life both he and his character had reached. The films continued: Star Trek III, The Search for Spock in 1984, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home in 1986, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier in 1989, and Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country in 1991. Alongside these, beginning in 1982, Shatner also starred in the police drama T.J. Hooker on ABC, playing veteran Los Angeles Police Sergeant Thomas Jefferson Hooker. The show ran for 5 seasons, 91 episodes in total, finishing its run on CBS in 1986. T.J. Hooker was not a prestige production, but it was a solid, commercially successful television series, and it demonstrated that Shatner could carry a show as a leading man outside of Star Trek. By his own account, he enjoyed making it and threw himself into the physical demands of the role, doing many of his own stunts. The Star Trek V film, released in 1989, deserves a separate note. Shatner directed it. He had secured a contractual right to direct a film, mirroring Leonard Nimoy's having directed The Voyage Home. He co-developed the story, which involved the crew encountering Spock's half-brother, Sybok, and following him to a distant planet on the ostensible trail of God. The film was hampered by budget cuts. The original budget of around $36 million was reduced, and by visual effects that weren't up to the ambition of the story. Star Trek V received mixed to negative reviews. Roger Ebert called it a mess. Shatner himself has called it his biggest career regret, citing not the concept, which he still believes in, but his inability to execute it properly given the production constraints. It remains, in the eyes of many Star Trek fans, the weakest entry in the original series of films. The final chapter for Shatner as Kirk in the main theatrical films was Star Trek Generations, released in November 1994. In it, the cast of the original series hands the franchise off to the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation, with Shatner's Kirk meeting Patrick Stewart's Picard in a narrative that straddles 2 time periods. Kirk dies at the end, twice technically, due to rewrites requested by the studio and cast, who felt the first film death wasn't sufficiently heroic. The second version, in which Kirk falls from a bridge on an alien planet after defeating the villain, was what made the final cut. Shatner was unhappy with it. He felt it was undignified. A hero's death should not involve falling off a bridge. Malcolm McDowell, who played the villain and kills Kirk, reportedly received death threats from fans afterward. Kirk's death in Generations closed the door, at least for the time being, on Shatner's presence at the center of the Star Trek universe. He was 63 years old. The wilderness of the 1990s. The decade following Generations was an interesting one for Shatner. He was not struggling the way he had in the early 1970s. His finances were in better shape. He had a well-established public profile, and he had more than enough offers to stay busy. But the big swings were harder to find. The Oscars weren't calling. The parts available to him were often winking at his own persona, rather than genuinely extending his range. He hosted Rescue 911 on CBS from 1989 to 1996, a dramatic reenactment series centered on real emergency situations. The show was a genuine ratings success. It won a People's Choice Award for Favorite New TV Dramatic Series, and Shatner's presence as host gave it a steady, authoritative center, but it was hosting, not acting. He was behind a desk, narrating other people's stories. He wrote. Beginning in 1989, he developed a series of science fiction novels under the Tech War banner, about a former police officer working as an investigator in a dystopian future. He collaborated with science fiction writer Ron Goulart on the first several books. The novels sold hundreds of thousands of copies and eventually spawned 4 television movies and a short-lived television series, in which Shatner played not the lead, but a supporting character named Walter Bascom. He also appeared in the 3rd and 4th seasons of the NBC comedy Third Rock from the Sun as the Big Giant Head, the alien superior of the main characters. It was a delightfully absurdist role, and his obvious enjoyment of it earned him an Emmy nomination. He appeared in Miss Congeniality in 2000 opposite Sandra Bullock, playing a competition official named Stan Fields. It was a supporting role in a broad comedy, but the film was a major commercial success and kept his name in the cultural conversation. In the late 1990s, he also became closely associated with the travel website Priceline.com, appearing in television commercials starting in April 1998. The Priceline campaign cast him as a pompous, slightly self-mocking version of himself, and he leaned into the self-parody with complete commitment. The ads were both effective and genuinely funny. They ran for years. He also owned stock in Priceline, and while reports of the stock making him a multimillionaire have been somewhat exaggerated, the association did not hurt him financially. David E. Kelley, the television writer and producer, later confirmed that seeing Shatner's Priceline work was part of what put Shatner in mind for the role that would change his later career entirely. But the personal side of the 1990s was marked by tragedy. Shatner had married Noreen Kidd in November 1997 in Pasadena, with Leonard Nimoy as best man. Kidd was a model and aspiring actress, 28 years younger than Shatner. Almost everyone who knew him had advised against the marriage. She had a serious problem with alcohol that had been known for years, had been to rehab multiple times, and whose drinking had nearly caused a fatal car accident involving one of Shatner's daughters. Shatner married her anyway. He said later he thought his love could help her beat it. He was wrong, and he knew he was wrong even as he did it. On August 9th, 1999, Shatner returned home to their Los Angeles house and found Noreen at the bottom of the backyard swimming pool. She was 40 years old. He dove in and pulled her out. Her skin was already blue. He performed CPR and called emergency services, but there was nothing to be done. The autopsy found her blood alcohol level was 0.27%, more than 3 times the legal driving limit, along with diazepam in her system. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death accidental drowning. The Los Angeles Police Department found no evidence of foul play and closed the case. Shatner later wrote that the grief was so overwhelming, it drove him to thoughts of suicide. He described lying beside the pool in the moonlight, having just held her body, and wondering whether he could bear continuing. He bore it. He channeled some of the grief into his 2004 album Has Been, a spoken word record produced by Ben Folds, which included a piece called What Have You Done that described the night he found Noreen. The album was unexpectedly well received, reviewed seriously by music critics who had come prepared to be condescending and instead found something genuinely moving. Denny Crane and the second act nobody saw coming. In 2003, writer and producer David E. Kelley was winding down his long-running legal drama, The Practice, on ABC. He wrote a new character into the show's final season, an eccentric, self-important senior law partner named Denny Crane, a man of prodigious legal talent who was possibly beginning to lose his grip on reality, though it was never entirely clear. Kelley wrote it for Shatner. The character made his first appearance in 2003 and recurred throughout The Practice's final season. At the Emmy Awards in September 2004, Shatner won the award for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series for the role. He was 73 years old. It was his first Emmy Award. When The Practice ended, Kelley launched a spin-off series centered on Denny Crane and his unconventional law firm. Boston Legal premiered on ABC on October 3, 2004, and ran for 5 seasons and 101 episodes, concluding in December 2008. Shatner played Denny Crane throughout the entire run. His scene partner for much of it was James Spader, who played the morally flexible attorney Alan Shore. The two of them developed one of the more unusual and genuinely affecting relationships in American television drama, a friendship between an aging, eccentric man who refused to acknowledge his decline and a brilliant, troubled younger man who needed something he couldn't name. They sat on a balcony together at the end of nearly every episode, drinking scotch and talking, and somehow it worked every time. At the Emmy Awards in September 2005, Shatner won Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Drama Series for Boston Legal. He received additional nominations in that same category for 2006, 2007, 2008, and 2009. He also won a Golden Globe for the role in January 2005. In 2006, he was inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame. He had arrived at his 70s and was receiving the most sustained critical recognition of his career. Boston Legal also allowed Shatner to do something he had always been good at, but had not always had the opportunity to display in the right context. Broad, self-aware comedy, delivered with complete sincerity. Denny Crane was a ridiculous man, and Shatner never played him any other way. He went fully ridiculous, fully committed, and found the genuine humanity inside the absurdity. It was, in some ways, the performance that all his preceding decades of playing with his own persona in commercials and guest appearances had been building toward. He had spent the 1990s learning to be funny as himself. Then Kelly handed him a character in whom all of that could find a home. Space at 90. One chapter of Shatner's life that has nothing to do with acting, but everything to do with who he is, deserves its own mention. On October 13, 2021, Shatner flew to the edge of space aboard a Blue Origin New Shepard capsule on the NS-18 mission. He was 90 years old, and he became the oldest person ever to travel to space. The flight was a brief suborbital trip, approximately 11 minutes from launch to landing, but it crossed the Kármán line, the internationally recognized boundary of space at 100 kilometers above Earth. What happened after the capsule landed was not what many people expected. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Blue Origin and a self-described lifelong Star Trek fan, was on the ground to greet the crew. He came toward Shatner with a champagne bottle. Shatner stopped him. He wanted to talk first, before the celebration. He stood in the Texas desert and described what he had seen from the capsule window. He talked about the moment the blue of the atmosphere gave way to the black of space. He used the word grief. He said seeing the fragility of Earth from above filled him with an unexpected sadness. He was crying. For decades, people had made jokes about Shatner in space. He played a starship captain on television. He was supposed to be the man of the cosmos. And when he actually went, what he experienced was not triumph or adventure, but something closer to sorrow, a direct encounter with the thinness of the layer that protects all life on Earth. He said he wanted to tell everyone he knew about it. It was, by any measure, a remarkable moment from a remarkable life. The Nemoy question. No account of William Shatner's life is complete without addressing Leonard Nimoy. The two men met in 1964 when they guest starred together in an episode of The Man from UNCLE. They worked together for 3 years on Star Trek and for nearly 3 decades across the animated series and the films. Nimoy served as best man at Shatner's 1997 wedding to Noreen Kidd. They were, by most definitions, close friends, and yet it ended without a resolution. In 2016, Shatner disclosed publicly that he and Nimoy had not spoken in the 5 years before Nimoy's death in February 2015. They had argued over what precisely has never been fully clarified. The estrangement had happened gradually. By the end, there was silence where there had once been a friendship of 50 years. Nimoy died without the two of them reconciling. Shatner was not invited to the funeral. He talked about it in the documentary The Captains in 2011 and in his 2016 memoir, Leonard, My 50-Year Friendship with a Remarkable Man, written after Nimoy's death. The book is unusual. It is simultaneously a tribute to a friend and a reckoning with the failure to repair something that mattered while there was still time. Shatner has said he doesn't fully understand why the estrangement happened, and that he has had to make peace with not having a final conversation. It is one of the few subjects in a very long and talkative life that Shatner handles with something approaching quiet. What persists? William Shatner is 95 years old at the time of this writing. He still appears at conventions. He still accepts voice work and television roles. He teaches acting. He competes with his horses. He maintains a horse farm near Versailles, Kentucky, and has long bred and shown quarter horses and American saddlebreds. He received the Order of Canada, one of the highest civilian honors his country can bestow. In 2011, McGill University gave him an honorary doctorate of letters. In 2014, NASA awarded him its Distinguished Public Service Medal. His books keep coming, so do the interviews. He is, at 95, still one of the most recognizable people in American entertainment. A man who has been impersonated on Saturday Night Live by John Belushi in 1976 and again by Daryl Hammond in 2000, whose name has become an adjective for a particular style of theatrical delivery, and who managed to take a television role in his early 70s and win 2 Emmy Awards with it. The vanishing the title of this video promises didn't last very long in the grand scheme of a life that has run for nearly a century. He was invisible for a few years in the early 1970s, genuinely struggling, genuinely uncertain, genuinely living in a truck and wondering how things would resolve. But he never actually left. He kept showing up, kept taking the jobs, kept staying in the business through sheer refusal to be done with it, and the business kept finding new ways to use him. Star Trek. The original series ran for only 3 seasons. It was canceled in 1969 for mediocre ratings, and yet it became the foundation of one of the longest-running franchises in entertainment history, and the man who played its captain has outlasted virtually every prediction about what his career would amount to. He has outlasted Kirk's death in generations, outlasted the critical consensus of the 1970s and 1980s, outlasted his own darkest period in 1999, and outlasted the dismissiveness that surrounded his Priceline commercials and B-movies by eventually winning the Emmy they said he would never win. There is a certain irony in the fact that the role most associated with Shatner, Captain James T. Kirk, is a character who also refused to accept no-win scenarios. Kirk famously reprogrammed a Starfleet training exercise because he didn't believe in scenarios designed to end in defeat. It would be easy to overread that parallel, but Shatner himself has talked, in interview after interview across the decades, about never accepting that the trajectory was permanently downward, never treating the truck camper as an ending, never treating the B-movies as a final verdict, never treating the estrangement from Nemoy or the death of Noreen as the last word on who he was. There is a version of this story where William Shatner vanishes after Star Trek, where the truck bed camper is the final chapter and the canceled show is the epitaph. That version is, by now, historical fiction. What actually happened was considerably more interesting. A man who seemed finished kept going. The show that seemed forgotten turned out to be one of the most durable things in the culture, and the real reason William Shatner vanished after Star Trek is simply that he didn't. Not really, not for long, and not for good. If you found value in this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories like this one ahead, and we'd love to have you with us for them.